Fantastic. Thank you, Kara. So we are at 7:03. I can still see the participants tab creeping up a little bit, but I will go ahead and get started and just give you guys a little intro to myself and the organization before we dive into the whole point that we're here to talk about how to sustainably care for your houseplants. So, um, who we are. So as Sustainability Matters, we are a grassroots conservation nonprofit based out of the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And since our founding in 2018, we have hosted over 250 programs serving more than 25,000 participants around Virginia and around the world for webinars like this. In the past, we've done webinars on composting and stuff like native plants, and we've had participants as far away as Southeast Asia who are watching it as they eat their breakfast. I'm not sure what they're really gaining from learning about native plants in Virginia, but we are always happy to have them and love that the Sustainability Matters family really is truly a global thing. And we really pride ourselves on cultivating community through conservation. And our main focus is giving individuals like you guys here today all of the tools and knowledge you need to make a difference in the environment without having to wait for the government to change any laws. This is stuff you can do without any approval. It's just stuff that is super fun, realistic, and inclusive of everybody. If you follow us on social media, you have probably seen my face talking at you a lot, and to some degree, I apologize for that. But you've probably seen our videos on things like how to make all natural fertilizers, how to upcycle wine bottles, and why native plants are important to our ecosystems. And although those don't seem all necessarily directly related, they all deal with sustainability, and our primary goal, more than anything else, is to make sustainability fun, realistic, and inclusive of everybody. In the past, a lot of conservation and sustainability has been left to rich white landowners, and we are really trying to change the narrative around that because sustainability is something that everybody can be practicing. And even though these large corporations may not be doing the best things for our planet, we can still make a big difference as individuals in changing what they do and changing what we do in our own personal lives. So as Kara mentioned, during this webinar, we are going to do our best to get all of your questions answered, and please use the Q&A feature instead of the chat, and be sure to upvote the questions that you guys want answered because we will be prioritizing those first. So I will be answering some of those questions throughout the webinar today, but also we should have time for a little bit of a Q&A session at the end. But if we happen to not get to your question, please feel free to send us a message on social media, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Instagram is probably the best way to reach us because they still just have that separate feature for messages. And for some reason, Facebook just does not prioritize chronology in any of their notification systems. So you could send me something 2 minutes ago and I will see something from like 5 days ago instead. So best way to reach me is probably through Instagram. And now that that's a little bit about Sustainability Matters, let's actually go through our first set of poll questions. So I will send those out to you. We would really like to learn more about you guys, where you're joining us from, how you found out about this webinar, how many houseplants you have, of course, is something that we want to know for a webinar like this. And if you've ever propagated a plant before, I would imagine a lot of you guys probably have because you're in this webinar, but please feel free to, like I said, hop in there and answer those questions. All of this stuff really helps give us a better idea of the community that we're serving, how to better reach you guys, and how we can better tailor our programming to you all going forward. So as you guys are coming in, it looks like we got a lot of people from the Shenandoah Valley, which is always great to see. I'm sure I know some of you guys personally, so thank you for going ahead and joining. It is great to, again, not actually see you because you guys are unfortunately just a little number on the screen, but you were with us in spirit, and we really appreciate you guys being here. We also have some friends from the rest of the Eastern United States, some of the Midwest, and even some from outside the US, like I said before, which is always great to see. Looks like a lot of you guys found us through Instagram, which is absolutely great. We've been really making a push to up our social media game in the past few months. Again, I apologize for talking at you so much on there. I know my little kind of clean shaven head isn't the most appealing thing to look at in the world, but I do my best. And how many houseplants you own? Looks like almost half of you have too many to count, and you are right in there with me. Hannah, Kara, and I were talking right before we started this webinar, and they're asking me how many I have, and I lost count a long time ago. And it looks like a lot of you guys are pros at propagating too. So hopefully, maybe you guys will be able to teach us some stuff and your fellow Zoom webinar participants about how to more sustainably care for your houseplants. So thank you guys for filling out that out. And while the rest of you do that, I will give a little bit of background about me, because I will be the person that's talking to you for the next hour or so. So I don't even know if I introduced myself at the beginning, but my name is Kenny Barnes, and I serve as the Program and Outreach Coordinator for Sustainability Matters. And I've been with the company since February of this year. So I organize a lot of our in-person programming, but also do all of our social media work. And personally, I have been doing social media for the past like 2 or 3 years on my own personal page at A Plant Project, where I post informational and oftentimes pretty goofy videos about my houseplant collection and my journey to collect and care for all of them. That houseplant collection currently sits around 100 or so, split between my parents' place and my own place, because I do not have that much room for them anymore, unfortunately. But in my time as a houseplant parent, I have had well over 200 plants. Lots of them have been given away. And unfortunately, lots of them have also perished due to a lot of factors, but sometimes my own improper care. And it was really that cycle of getting a plant, having it for a long time, slowly watching it kind of die, and then being happy because I have a new place to put a plant so I can buy a new one. That really sparked my interest into the topic of this webinar, how to care for your houseplants more sustainably and eco-friendly. Because for a really, really long time, I don't think that I was doing it right. And I think a lot of people out there don't really realize the environmental impacts that curating this indoor jungle can really have. But before we get into that, I think it probably makes sense to make sure that we are all on the same page of what exactly sustainability means. And it looks different for everybody. You guys all probably have your own unique definitions of sustainability. So if you'd like, please feel free to share those in the chat. I think it's always valuable to get different perspectives on exactly what it is. But here at Sustainability Matters, we define sustainability as fulfilling the needs of our current generations without compromising the needs of future generations. And so, no, it is not something that is like never driving a car again, or you can never eat meat again, or you have to be the perfect zero waste king or queen. That is not really what sustainability is about. It is about ensuring a balance between economic growth, social well-being, and environmental care. So stuff like using a reusable water bottle, or volunteering for a beach cleanup, or bringing your own Tupperware when you go out to eat if you know you're not going to finish it, so you don't have to use those styrofoam or number 4 or 5 plastic takeaway containers that they will inevitably give you and cannot be recycled. Those are all examples of sustainability. It may not seem like they're super big things, but it really does add up, and it changes the way we think about the world and makes us more conscious consumers and better stewards of our planet. So now that we're kind of on the same page about what sustainability is, let's get into the meat of this webinar and talk about what we're all here for, the plants. But again, I think a little bit of background on them is necessary before we get into the exact tips of how you can care for them more sustainably. And I think this background is really important because houseplants have been around for a while, and really from the start, they have kind of symbolized the opposite of what a lot of people envision them as. They are not the best for the environment. They are not the most sustainable, especially in Western culture. So the way we kind of think about houseplants now was really popularized during the Victorian era in England. So pretty much the second half of the 19th century. I think it was like 1837 to 1901. She ruled for a really, really long time. But if there are any history buffs out there, you know that this is essentially right after the Industrial Revolution had concluded its heyday in Europe. So there were tons of new positive changes and developments in the Western world in terms of technology and knowledge, but a lot of those new innovations were pretty bad for the environment. And it was one of those developments that actually allowed people to start collecting houseplants in the first place. Central heating from coal and iron furnaces. That was the first time people, like regular middle-class people, were really able to keep their house warm enough to keep these plants alive, because most plants that we have are tropicals. They like surviving somewhere between 65 to 80 plus degrees. So if you were a poor peasant in England or something, you were not really focused on keeping a palm alive. You were more focused on staying warm yourself, making sure you had food, and doing all of this stuff. So the people who could afford houseplants were typically pretty well off financially, so they became seen as symbols of status and wealth rather than a way to enhance our relationship with the natural world, which I think is why a lot of people have houseplants now. And that kind of focus on the status and the commodification of houseplants is really evident in the example of orchid hunters. I actually didn't know about this before I started researching this webinar, but it is absolutely fascinating. So these guys primarily came from England, and they would literally boat across the Atlantic Ocean to South America in search of new botanical species to bring back to Europe. So they would literally go on the boat, for a couple of weeks, go deep into Andean peaks in the Amazonian jungle, looking for orchids. And they oftentimes dealt with angry indigenous populations who were obviously pretty mad that these white people were just coming in and completely stripping their landscape of all of these native plants. And it was really not about scientific discovery at all. It was pretty much entirely profit-based. I literally read a story about these two rival orchid hunters that hated each other so much that one of them literally urinated on the other one's orchids to kill them so he couldn't take them back. It is absolutely crazy stuff. There was death threats. There's been people killed. It is absolutely crazy. And again, all for money, not for the research at all. During these expeditions, as many as 10,000 samples could be collected, again, from these like deep jungles way off the coast. So it took weeks to cart them back to the coast, weeks to transport them back across the Atlantic to Europe. And in a lot of cases of those 10,000 or so species that were collected, they would get back to Europe with a total of 0 specimens. So obviously the ones that did survive were crazy expensive, and people were willing to pay thousands of dollars to get them, which I think is pretty crazy, especially when you think about like how, like just for inflation, like thousands of dollars back then is a lot of money now. And it is pretty sad because there are still areas in Central and South America in which the plant population has never actually fully recovered from this decimation. And today, many countries have laws in place to stop the wholesale stripping of orchids and other plants from their natural habitat, which is great to see. So houseplants kind of continue to operate as this status symbol for the next few years up until World War II, which obviously changed the world and introduced us to this whole idea of globalization. And essentially, at least in my opinion, it kind of reminded Americans that we can go to the rest of the world and kind of take what we want. So we started doing that again. And a lot of the design stuff that came out of World War II also relied heavily on plants. So stuff like a mid-century modern aesthetic, or this tropical island-inspired design was really popular after World War II. Those relied heavily on palms for aesthetic. So people started getting more tropical houseplants, and that pretty much brought us to where we are today in our houseplant world. And then COVID happened. And this is probably the biggest shift in the houseplant game that has happened since World War II. It's when I personally got really into houseplants because I was really bored and had a lot of time on my hand, which a lot of people did, I think. But in 2020, saw an 18% increase in houseplant demand, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. And a lot of that was driven by the desire to bring the outdoors in, a distraction from current events. Houseplants have been proven to really help with anxiety, depression, and a bunch of mental health issues that a lot of us were facing during the pandemic. But there was also the proliferation of social media plant accounts, which a lot of people have dubbed plantstagrams. I'm not the biggest fan of that term personally. I have one. I still call it my plantstagram because it's kind of like a meme. But it really just changed the game of houseplants because everybody was seeing these amazing specimens online that were pretty much impossible to replicate by yourself because these people have been growing them for years. But it really changed the game of houseplants and made them much more of commodities, again, rather than enhancing our relationship with the natural world. Personal story, like I said, I really got into houseplants during COVID. I had this one picture, it was on my dining room table, and I got home in March of 2020, and I brought home my 5 houseplants from college, and they were sitting there. I took a bunch of pictures. I was so proud of them. And then a couple of weeks later, I just got down the wormhole of YouTube, spent like 3 hours looking at these houseplants, and ended up with 2020 with well over 80, probably close to 100 houseplants. And I started my own Instagram page. And over the next 2+ years, I just started growing that audience and sharing those videos online. And like I said, I probably had about 200 houseplants during that time, and I killed a lot of them. And I think a lot of people do. I think it's a pretty accurate representation of what the typical millennial, I'm not a millennial, I'm a Gen Z, but what those kind of people are. Right now, the houseplant market is anywhere between a 15 to $30 billion industry globally. So there's a lot of money in it, and that's estimated to grow about 7% each year. So it's a very, very fast growing business. And as I mentioned, this was all really
Kenny,
driven.
I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt you quickly. We're learning that the chat is not working, and I don't seem to have the power to open that up. I don't know if you can.
Okay, let me see. Everyone, does that open the chat? There we go. Did that do it? Woo! Amazing. Thank you for letting me know. So now you guys can actually put the stuff in the chat, like what does sustainability mean to you and all that stuff. Please still feel free to do it because we would still love to learn about all that stuff. So again, that COVID boom was really just fueled by consumerism. And buying became the hobby more than actual plant care became the hobby. So a lot of people ended up growing their collection way too big, way too fast. They were getting these plants that they had no idea how to take care of. Pretty much all they knew was they're pretty. So 70% of millennials currently identify as plant parents, and the average plant parent has killed at least 7 plants. So if you are someone out there who does have plants and has killed them, you are not alone. And I can promise you, I'm bringing that average up. I am not below that 7 at all. And again, they're really just seen as not living things. They're seen as commodities. And that's really like shown in the price gouging that happens in the houseplant market. It's all based on social media trends and what the trendy plants are at the time. So for example, my #1 wish list plant for a while was a variegated alocasia frydek. And at the start of 2021, you could not find one for less than $600 online. And trust me, I looked. Hours every single day, I looked. But now, about 2 years later, you can literally hop on Etsy and buy one for $50. It was purely a market-driven craze that was costing people tons of money and hurting the environment because people were buying these exotic plants that they really didn't know how to care for. So in the wise words of one P. Diddy and the notorious B.I.G., mo money, mo problems. This is a pretty big industry. There's a higher demand for these houseplants, which means there's more production, which means there's more greenhouse gas emissions coming. I mean, you don't really think about it, but they have to grow these plants in massive greenhouses, which a lot of the times have to be heated and have the fans going, which relies on fossil fuels burning. There's obviously a lot of water use that goes into keeping these plants hydrated. There's the materials to grow them, like all of the soil additives, the fertilizers, the plastic pots that they sit in, and the transportation to take them from those growers to the retailers and from those retailers to your front door. So now that we have a little bit better understanding of the environmental problems caused by houseplants, the plan for the rest of our time is to actually go through and give you guys the tools you need to care for them more sustainably. And it is true that there isn't like a zero net carbon way to get houseplants, but that does not mean that you shouldn't have them. Again, we are focused on making sustainability fun, realistic, and inclusive of everybody. If you didn't do anything that had greenhouse gas emissions, none of you could have pets because, as terrible as it is to say, they actually have a pretty high carbon footprint, but they bring us a lot of joy, and that's what life's about. And houseplants bring joy, so you should still have your houseplants. So the first component of sustainably shopping is choosing the right plant for you. I hate staring at myself in this picture right now, but I'm just gonna ignore it. So the 3 most important factors to consider when choosing the right plant for you are light, water, and time. Light is by far the most important one. Without it, your plants are gonna die. Even the stuff like snake plants that are labeled low light, they do need sun. You cannot stick them in a room without anything. I really hate that label of low light because all it essentially means is your plants are going to die slower if they don't get a lot of light. If you have a lot of plants, I do think it's probably smart to invest in a light meter. You can see how much light each different spot gets, so you can better cater your plants to that exact area. But if you don't have a lot of plants, a compass works just as well. Figure out if you're north facing, south facing, east facing, or west facing, and you can just Google what plants are best for that type of window. And the second thing is watering. Think about how often you have to water it. Is it a weekly water like most tropical plants? Is it a monthly water like snake plants and cactus? And that goes into time. Do you have the time to water it and to fertilize it and to treat it for pests and to repot it? There's a lot of things to consider when picking out a plant. So I like to ask myself these three questions. Do I have room for it? Do I have time for it? Have I killed it before? And if I don't satisfy all of those questions, I don't buy the plant. That last one I learned the hard way. I probably had 5 maidenhair ferns in my life, killed every single one. And I will never get another one of those because clearly they don't like me and I don't like them. Another question to ask also is this pet safe? If you have pets that like to nibble on plants, a lot of them are toxic, some much more so than others. So again, rely on the internet for that. Do your best to Google it. There are tons of good lists out there and great resources for you to pick the plant that is best for you and your growing environment. So now that you kind of know what plant is best for you, what's the best way to get it? The most sustainable way to actually procure it? And like pretty much everything else, buying locally and secondhand is the most eco-friendly choice. Local nurseries hold a really special place in my heart because I worked at one for about a year and got an appreciation for how much hard work goes into curating those plants and making sure that they're cared for properly. Workers at local nurseries typically know a lot more about the plants, so you can ask them questions about which one would be best for your environment. And the plants tend to be just a lot healthier because the people working at them actually know what they're doing. If there are pests, people at local nurseries will treat those pests, as opposed to buying plants at big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart. Those typically come in just giant shipments of stuff that is not growing in the most healthy soil. And because people at those stores typically don't know how to care for those houseplants, a lot of the times you're buying them with disease, with pests, and with soil that is just not conducive to growing happy and healthy plants. Obviously, you can still find some gems. I have a lot of plants that I've gotten from them, especially some big ones because they're cheaper, but typically I have to repot those into my own soil, and I have dealt with the pests and all of that stuff. In addition to buying locally, another great option is Facebook Marketplace and Facebook groups. These got really popular during COVID and afterwards, especially locally, like different Washington, D.C. plant group, Winchester plant group. And those are great ways to find people that are either looking to trade their plants or sell them. Those groups and Facebook Marketplace, you can really find some big ones for steals. With people moving, they normally don't like to move with their giant houseplants. So I saw some 8-foot tall fiddly figs you can get for $100 if you watch it like a hawk, And then for stuff like pots, plant stands, and just decor, Goodwill and thrift shops have really awesome stuff. I really like doing that because it adds a little more character to it instead of just buying a plain white pot that every single person could get at Lowe's. And in addition to buying stuff, there's also ways you can pretty much just get houseplants completely for free. Like I say, joining those Facebook groups is a really great idea. People are always looking to swap their plants and sometimes even giving them away for free. Stuff like aloe, pothos, tradescantia, they all grow super fast and people are always looking to get rid of them. So if you hop on there and just say you're looking for this, there is a very good chance there will be someone who's like, oh, I have 14 of these that I don't have time to take care of. Please come by and get them. I've done that personally. I've given away a ton of houseplants that I don't have time to take care of. And most houseplant people are pretty friendly and looking to make sure that these living things keep on living. So that's a great way to go about it. And a lot of the times these plant groups also offer plant swaps. I believe we hosted one in Winchester back in 2021. And if that's something you guys would like to see Sustainability Matters host again, please let us know in the chat. We could definitely try and organize that for sometime either later this year or the spring of next year. We love seeing you guys, and swapping plants is a pretty fun thing. And another great way to grow your houseplant collection is through propagations. Based on the poll, it seemed like a lot of you guys were pros on this. So I'm not going to go too much into detail, but it's a great way to essentially regrow plants from plants that you already have. So you can do it 2 ways, through cuttings and division. With cuttings, you just take a cutting of the plant and regrow it from there. And with divisions, you're literally separating the plant at the root level and just chopping it in half. And then you have 2 really happy new plants for free. If you're cheap with your gifts, this is awesome gift, eco-friendly, don't have to buy anything. It's absolutely perfect, especially if you have some rare plants. People will really be fiending for those propagations. So Now that you have sustainably acquired your plant, you know what plant you want. You went to that local store or Facebook, or you went to a friend and you got the actual plant. Now let's get into actually how to care for them sustainably, and that includes the type of soil that you use. Unfortunately, most of the soil bases and additives that are popular are non-renewable, energy intensive to collect, and are overall just pretty bad for the planet. So let's start with the base of the soil, which typically deals with the moisture retention. Most soils that are super popular, like Miracle-Gro or Espoma, use sphagnum peat moss as a base, which has been used since the 1940s. And that peat comes primarily from sphagnum peat mosses, which grow in bogs, primarily in Canada and Russia. And these bogs cover about 5% of the Earth's surface, but sequester more carbon than all of the planet's forests combined. So these guys are absolutely vital to our ecosystems. They do a fantastic job sequestering that carbon. But unfortunately, we use it for houseplants. Peat is harvested, technically actually mined, by draining up that wetland, scraping the surface of the ground several feet deep. And then once that peat moss is extracted, it's dried, screened, and compressed. And as soon as all of that's harvested, obviously it's energy intensive to do that. There are fossil fuels burning to collect it. But as soon as it's harvested, all of that carbon that's been stored up for centuries is released right back into the atmosphere. So essentially, we're destroying ecosystems, releasing carbon dioxide, and using fossil fuels to do it. So that's kind of 3 strikes and you're out. And there actually are some countries that are now banning the sale of it, including England. They're banning the sale of it in 2024. And Hannah, I see your hand up.
2 quick things. First of all, Kara and I, for some reason, cannot chat to all the participants. So if we're trying to put links in the chat, I don't think any of you can see them, which is problematic. And then while you're trying to fix that, Kenny, sorry, we have a great question. Are having succulents as houseplants more sustainable?
Yes. So actually, a little bit later in the webinar, I have plans, but water usage is a big component of sustainable houseplant care. So choosing stuff that doesn't use that much water is a great way to cut down on that water usage. Things like cactus, succulents, ponytail palms, aloe are all really good choices. And again, I would really just Google lists for drought-tolerant houseplants. You will get a ton of great options. I personally am a notorious succulent killer. I don't know what it is about them. I think the biggest myth in the houseplant world is that succulents are easy to take care of. To me, low maintenance and easy are not the same thing. But yes, doing stuff that is drought tolerant will just mean that you don't have to use that much water, which is great. But yeah, so England banned the sale of peat moss in 2024, which is awesome. Hopefully more countries do that going forward. It's an unsustainable resource, but a nice sustainable alternative is cocoa coir, which is a waste byproduct of the coconut industry. It's literally just the outer shells of coconut crushed and ground up into super small fibers. And it is great for holding on to that moisture. And I personally find that it works just as well as peat moss. And it's almost kind of shiny sometimes too. So I actually kind of the look of it a little bit more. And then in addition to the moisture retention, there's also the aeration and drainage components of soil. So it is a vital component of the soil because you got to make sure that those roots are getting the oxygen that they need to grow. Perlite is superheated volcanic glass, and vermiculite is a superheated naturally occurring mineral. So as you can probably guess, that is not overly sustainable. It takes fossil fuels to mine those, fossil fuels for the intensive heating to actually get them to a point where you can use them for your houseplants. And those both come at a super, super high carbon price. But thankfully, there are, again, some great eco-friendly alternatives to that. Cocoa husk is literally just, again, the outside of coconuts. They're just not broken down as much. Those are great to make sure you get air to the roots. Pumice, that is a natural, unprocessed, organic product. It does come from mines, so there is still the fossil fuel of mining it and transport, so it's not the most sustainable, but it is definitely better than perlite and vermiculite. And then bark is also a great one. They're not typically cutting down trees for that. It's typically just a byproduct of other industries that they use it for. And those also contain some minerals and nutrients, which are really good for your soil. And sand is great. It's like my favorite soil additive. There's a lot of sand, and there's also a lot of glass sand now. So if you're able to find like glass bottles that can't be recycled, a lot of the times they're broken down, turned into glass. If you can find those particles small enough, they're not super sharp. So, I mean, they're not like not sharp, but you can add them into your soil, keep them from going into the landfill. And it actually adds a really nice sparkle, because if you got like a blue bottle or something, you're going to have a nice little blue sparkle in your soil. And that's fun. Who doesn't love a little sparkle in their life, right? And if you don't have a lot of houseplants, you probably don't want to. Yes, Hannah, look like you about to talk. Oh, all good. Okay. If you don't have a lot of houseplants, you probably don't want to be buying like 4 or 5 different soil additives to add to your soil. That makes complete sense. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of money. So one of my personal favorite products is Rosy Soil. That is a carbon neutral soil. They have really, really good materials. I've worked with them in the past on my own. And again, we'll put the link for that in the resources that we send out after this webinar. But just a great company, neutral carbon footprint, and just a lot easier than mixing your own soil if you're not super about the houseplants. So we got a little bit ahead of ourselves with this, but now we are to reducing our water usage. And although the water cycle is technically makes water a renewable and infinite resource, in reality, there is not really an excess of fresh water around the world. According to a 2023 study by the UN, 2 billion people around the world don't have access to clean drinking water. And the overuse of fresh water in household settings means that there's less water for agricultural use. And this is kind of a very, very future look at it. But, if we keep using all this fresh water, we're eventually going to have to start pulling it out of aquifers and groundwater supplies, which will most likely have slower regeneration rates than the extraction rates, which could leave us without fresh water. Again, that is a very, very far in the future. But even today, water takes a lot of time, energy, and money to filter and clean so that it's drinkable. I think people often forget about this part in the water cycle. But like if you go to the bathroom, that does not just immediately go back into your sink. There's a lot of fossil fuels and time and money that goes into cleaning that water, and that uses fossil fuels, which are not that renewable. And again, reducing your water use will also just save you money. So it's helping the planet and it's helping you. And the first step in reducing your water usage is really just learning how to water properly. And that includes making sure that you pick the right soil. So we just went through all those soil additives you can use. For stuff like tropical plants, they typically like their soil to stay relatively moist. So you should probably prioritize having a good abundance of cocoa coir in that. And probably don't need as much of the cocoa bark or the sand or the pumice, which will make the soil dry out faster. Overwatering is typically very common among plant parents, especially beginners. I used to overwater like an absolute fiend because, more water equals more love, right? That's completely wrong. And I learned that lesson the hard way. I lost a lot of plants to root rot learning that lesson. You see them drooping, you just think, oh, they need more water and they'll perk right back up. It's like, no, you're actually just suffocating those roots. They're getting no air and it's not doing the best. And that mostly happens because of poor soil, lack of aeration, watering too often, which often comes from watering schedules. Watering schedules are super helpful for busy people. We're all busy people, and it's pretty easy to forget about houseplants because they can't scream at us when they need water. But a lot of the times with watering schedules, you can end up watering a lot more than you need to, or not enough. There have been some plants that when I used a watering schedule and I looked at it and I was like, I don't know how I didn't notice you looked terrible for a week, but it was kind of past the point of saving by the time that I checked on it. So instead of relying on a watering schedule, I just recommend using the good old finger test. Unless you have a cactus or a succulent, pretty much all houseplants are tropicals. And in general, you can let the soil dry out about 1.5 to 2 inches. So pretty much that's like 7 to 10 days, depending on what houseplant you have. But in the mornings, I'll just walk through and just stick my finger right in the soil. If it's still wet, I don't need to water it. If it's dry, I probably do. It's as simple as that. Now, there are some water saving hacks you can kind of do to reduce the amount of water that you use. One of them is bottom watering, which is probably my preferred method of watering plants because it saves time, water, and it's just a lot easier. But essentially, you just have to fill a bowl or a tray with water and place your plants directly in there. They suck up all of that water into the soil through their roots, and it's great because they take only what they need. Normally, when you're watering from the top, you do it until it drains out of the bottom of those drainage holes. and you can literally see water just seeping out that is not being used for anything, and it's just going to have to be filtered again, reusing those fossil fuels. But with bottom watering, it just takes exactly what it needs. I like using boot trays for this, Tupperware if it's small stuff, but also those big plastic bins. They work really, really well. You can just load all your plants in there, fill it up an inch or so. It'll take like 30 minutes. You can take them all out, and then you're done. It's super, super easy. There's also self-watering planters, which is pretty much the same basic idea as that bottom watering. And I'll show you how to make your own in a couple slides, actually. Pot material is also very, very important for this. Ceramic and plastic pots tend to hold on to water the best. Whenever you buy a plant, you're typically buying it in that plastic nursery pot. So for tropicals, I like to do my best to actually keep it in there because I don't have to throw it away. And it also just makes the plant stay moist longer, so I don't have to water it as often. And then I can just stick it in a decorative planter on the outside so it still looks nice and aesthetic, because that is one of the most important parts of the houseplants, I know, is making your space livable and making it fun. But stuff like terracotta, like you see on the screen, that is clay. It is pretty porous, like it absorbs the water, so it will actually cause your soil to dry out a lot faster. I don't really plant any of my tropicals in it just because I don't want to have to water that often. They can still do well in there. You just have to water it more often, which again takes you more time, uses more water. So just something to consider. And another water saving hack is really just capturing the water that you are already using. When you're waiting for your water to heat up in the sink or in the shower, you can just stick a bucket underneath to capture all that water and use it to water your houseplants or the plants in your garden. This is really nice because if you let it sit out for a few days when you do this, all of the chemicals that are in the water from the tap will eventually evaporate out, which is great because a lot of these delicate houseplants like calathea or some of the variegated stuff need distilled water because those minerals can end up burning the leaves. So you're essentially getting that stuff for free when you'd otherwise either have to use like a Brita water filter or just go buy a plastic gallon jug of distilled or spring water from the grocery store. And one of the best ways to just capture water is capturing rainwater. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. I've personally never set one up before because I am not a homeowner, but we will be sure to send you guys a link for how you can set it up in the resources that we send you guys after. There's lots of ways to do it, but essentially you're just redirecting your gutters instead of going to a drain or to the street like they probably go to now. You just have a rain barrel and it goes all in there. During a moderate rainstorm, it averages about like 1/8 of an inch of rain to fall each hour. So if you have 500 square feet roof, that can fill a properly installed 50-gallon rain barrel in about an hour. And 50 gallons is a lot of water. I mean, personally, that would last me for months, and I have a lot of houseplants. So one rainstorm could kind of give you all you need for a really, really long time if you set this up. And although it seems pretty counterintuitive, growing plants hydroponically exclusively in water actually uses a lot less of it, 70 to 90% less water to be exact, which is pretty crazy. And it actually grows happier and healthier plants because there's better nutrient absorption because those roots have direct access to the water. It doesn't have to go through the soil or anything. So plants grow faster, they grow bigger, and there's a much lower chance of pests and disease. Personally, I have a few plants that I started out as propagations that have literally lived in water for years, and they're absolutely thriving. They're not even in a hydroponic system. The picture I had on the cuttings versus division slide a few ago, I was holding 2 Monstera propagations. I took those in 2021, and both of them are still alive and thriving now. I am not the best about changing the water. I'll be completely honest. I probably only add to it every month and add fertilizer maybe once a year. So I don't really pay attention to it, but both of them have grown like 5 or 6 new leaves since then. And they're absolutely thriving. Never had any issues with them. Would highly recommend. Plus, you get to look at those crazy roots, which I think is just as appealing as looking at the leaves, to be completely honest. And of course, like I said at the beginning, one of the best ways to cut down on your water usage is simply choosing houseplants that don't actually need that much water. So stuff like snake plants, jades, ZZ plants, cactus and succulents, ponytail palms, aloe, dracaena. Those are all awesome, awesome drought tolerant options. And again, really just rely on Google for that. That's how I learned every single thing that I know about houseplants is from Google and trial and error. There are so many resources out there, whether it be on Facebook groups, Reddit, I don't know, maybe you're on Threads. There are a bunch of ways to get information on houseplants and a bunch of lists out there to give you exactly what you need. So in addition to the watering, there's also, fertilizers and potential pests that you're going to be dealing with houseplants. And unfortunately, a lot of those are pretty chemically intensive, but thankfully there are some all natural substitutes that you can use. Fertilizers, tons of food scraps that would otherwise end up in our landfills generating methane can be used as all natural fertilizers. Banana peels are chock full of potassium, which helps with the movement of water and nutrients and carbohydrates in plant tissue, so just creating happier and healthier plants. You can either bury those directly into the soil of your plants. Honestly, would not recommend doing that for your houseplants, but if you got an outdoor garden, works really, really well. Or you can soak them in water for a few days, like up to a week, and then pour that into your soil. And it, in theory, will have some potassium to help your plants grow happy and healthy. Coffee grounds are another great one. They have tons of nitrogen, which is a crucial component of the chlorophyll molecule, which enables plants to capture sunlight through photosynthesis. So it's kind of what makes the plants green and allows them to live. Very, very important stuff. You can literally just toss coffee grounds on the soil of your plants and you can see a huge difference. I forget who it was. One of our board members said they did this with one of their peace lilies. It was struggling for years. Then they started putting these coffee ground fertilizers in it. And within a couple months, it had grown a ton. So it really, really works. Eggshells are another great one. All you got to do is rinse them with warm water and then kind of pound them into a powder. And they are great for calcium, which helps build strong plant walls to prevent disease and pests. And again, just sprinkle those around the soil of your plant. And even fish tank water. I've never done this because I don't have fish. That was actually one of my first phobias was fish. I don't know why. They're just really creepy and they always like wiggle around when they're out of water. Just not for me. But anyway, aquarium water accumulates nitrogen, phosphorus, a bunch of minerals and good bacteria and microorganisms. That is great for your plants. And if you have a freshwater tank, you probably know you have to be changing that every couple of weeks, maybe every couple of months, depending on how good you are at it. But otherwise, you would pretty much just be tossing that water down the sink, but you can just use it to water your plants. It probably doesn't smell the best. So again, maybe use this for your outdoor garden, or at least test it out there before the houseplants, because I cannot give you an accurate description of how it's going to smell. But it is a great way to make sure that that water doesn't go to waste. And last is compost. I am far from a compost expert. I kind of live a nomadic lifestyle at the moment, so I don't really have a good place to have a compost pile, and I don't really feel like carrying around a compost bin with me everywhere I go, as much as I would like to. But if you do have land and you are composting, you can also just throw all of these into the compost and then use your compost for your plants, and that would work just as well, if not better, than all of these little fertilizer hacks. And if you have houseplants, you are pretty much guaranteed to have pests at some point. And typically when you treat them, you're going to use a pesticide, which is very chemically intensive. You're probably going to take it outside to spray it, so it's not inside around your plant, around your pets and your kids, or you take it to the sink in the shower so you can just wash it down the drain. Unfortunately, when you wash it down the drain, it enters our waterways. It contaminates the soil. It contaminates other vegetation. So in addition to killing those pests that you're potentially targeting, it can also kill and harm birds, fish, beneficial insects, and plants that you might not have been targeting with it. So as an alternative, neem oil is really great. It's a natural product that comes from the neem tree, which is native to India. It's organic, it's biodegradable. And the EPA has found that neem oil has pretty much no unreasonable adverse effects. So it's really good to use, and it is great because it only targets leaf sucking and chewing insects. So it will not kill the beneficial stuff, and it kills insects at all stages of development, adult, larvae, and egg. A lot of them will only kill the adult version or only kill the egg version. But if you're not getting them at all three stages, you're going to have to be continually treating it over and over again. And you can pretty much make your own by just dropping in a little bit of dish soap into a gallon of water and 2 tablespoons of neem oil, shake it up, spray it onto your plants, and it should pretty much get rid of the problems. You're still probably going to have to do a couple of treatments of it, but it works really well in my opinion. But when you do that, be sure to keep your plants out of direct sunlight for a couple hours. If you spray them with neem oil and then they get hit with direct sunlight, that can end up causing crazy discoloration on your leaves, which pretty much nobody wants because you don't want yellow leaves when your plants are supposed to be looking green. Now, on to our last topic of the day, it's upcycling.
Can I have you pause for a second? We had a couple questions come in on that last section. One question is around coffee grounds. Amanda asked, do coffee grounds make the soil acidic, so you would need to be careful which plants you put them on?
They do, and thank you for reminding me about that, Amanda. They are a pretty highly acidic thing, so you do want to be sure that you are only putting them on plants that like that kind of soil, and be sure to use it sparingly. So if you make like 4 cups of coffee in your house in the morning and you just have like one of those big things that's just like seeping out coffee, do not toss all of that onto one of your plants. It will not do well. A little goes a long way. You can kind of just sprinkle it around the base of your plant and it should be fine.
And then one other question, Ryan asked, are there any concerns around bacteria growth when storing large amounts of water for long periods of time?
There definitely is that concern. I personally would make sure that you're not storing it outside and open. I did that once on accident with my compost and got a whole bunch of maggots, which is great for the compost, but was not great for my back deck. So there is a concern about that. I am far from an expert on that bacteria, so I would just refer you to go to Google. It will be your best friend and you can find that information, but I don't want to share anything that I am not positive with. Any more?
Yeah, I see Amanda also asked, how do you feel about insecticidal soap?
Insecticidal soap. I don't know if I've actually used insecticidal soap before, but I have just used regular dish soap as a cleaning solution. And that works really well to get rid of dust particles. It helps your plants capture more sunlight. And also is something that you already have on hand and is already going down your drain. So it's not really doing anything more than you would already be doing. Awesome. Well, upcycling is pretty much our last topic of the day. There are tons of stuff that's already at home and that like single-use plastics that work perfectly for plants. Upcycling planters, yogurt containers, most of those are number 4 or 5 plastics, which are not accepted in curbside recycling. So you can either use those as pots, as propagation vessels, really anything. You can hot glue or super glue some rope around the side and kind of wrap it around to make it look like a basket. If you want that kind of vibe, but you can also just leave it as like, here's my Oikos yogurt container that happens to have catnip in it. I do this. I'm obsessed with Cafe Bustelo for my morning coffee, and it comes in these cool little like yellow tubs. So I just drilled holes into the bottom of that, and I consistently grow cat grass in there. And I love the vibe because it's like, it's a plastic container. It just looks pretty cool. So stuff like, yeah, yogurt containers, plastic cups, maybe you're obsessed with Slurpees, you can use those for your plants. You just got to make sure that there's a hole on the bottom so any excess water is draining out. And glass jars are really like my favorite thing in the world. I'm not a dumpster diver by any means, but I have been known to see a like nice whiskey bottle in a recycling bin and grab it because it looks really, really good for terrariums. I'm not a whiskey drinker myself, but no hair on this chest. But I absolutely love the way they look, especially Jack Daniels. It's very sleek. But you can use those for terrariums, which are essentially enclosed ecosystems like the one you see on the screen. They consistently recycle the water and nutrients that are in there. And in theory, they can be sealed and pretty much live forever. There's one super famous one. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he closed it, I think 66, maybe 70 years ago. And it is still going strong. It is absolutely crazy. It's a super fun hobby. It's actually how I got into houseplants, really, is doing terrariums, and also really fun for kids because it lets them design their own ecosystem, learn more about the water cycle, nutrient cycling, and stuff like that. And stuff you can reuse for water, gallon jugs. I don't really use watering cans because most of them don't hold that much. But they're great because a lot of fertilizers are measured in gallons. It'll be 1 tablespoon per gallon. So you can just fill up the water, put it in there and mix it. Obviously, you don't need like 100 different watering jugs. So if you buy a gallon of milk every week, you can't really use this for everything. But you can also use those jugs for winter sowing seeds, which Hannah, one of our amazing panelists, gives workshops on, or for propagating stuff. Essentially, you just have to kind of chop it in half and treat it like a chest. So there's a little bit of a flap still. Put soil in the bottom, put your plants in there, and it will create a nice humid environment, which is really perfect for seeds and propagations to thrive. And then plastic bottles, like that Gatorade bottle you see on the screen, that is great for watering moss poles. All you have to do is poke some holes in the top of the cap, stick it right on there, and it will create a little bit of a drip system to get all of that stuff nice and hydrated. And there are a couple of ways you can create your DIY self-watering containers, like I talked about earlier. But essentially, you just slice a bottle in half, poke a hole through the bottle cap, and then feed a little thread or a rope through it. Then you put your plant in the top half. You guys can kind of tell from the picture that's on the screen. That's how you do it. It works really, really well. I actually did this on our own Instagram page, cutting a wine bottle in half, which was quite the process, but it works really, really well. I stuck a fern in there, which is a plant that really likes to stay moist and relatively humid. And I didn't have to refill that wine bottle with water for probably a month, which is really awesome because that means you can have more high maintenance plants that you don't have to take care of that much. And you're pretty much ensuring that they're growing healthy and staying moist the entire time. And for plants that are too big for that, you can also create a different kind of drip system by poking a hole through the bottle cap, sticking a Q-tip through it, making sure that it's super snug so none of the water is just like dripping out and like flowing. Take a chopstick or stake to that bottle, flip it upside down, and then stick it right in the plant. Not in the plant, but in the soil. Like, you don't want to be stabbing your plant with this thing, obviously. But that will create, again, kind of a drip system that will just keep the soil relatively moist and consistently just doing good for your plant. That's really great if you're going out of town for a few days and you don't necessarily want to transfer everything to plastic pots that are flipped upside down. You can create that drip system that works really well. And then I think this is my last slide, actually. Some household items that you can use for plants: cardboard and newspaper. I rely heavily on this every single time I repot a cactus. I get poked a lot when I repot without them, but you can essentially kind of wrap that around the base of your cactus and then use it to either take it out so you're not actually touching any of that spiky stuff. To-go containers, if you don't take your glass ones to the restaurant, you can use those for propagations, and maybe if they look nice, even for terrariums. Maybe you chipped a plate or a saucer and you don't want to use it for dinner guests. Don't throw it away. Just stick it underneath your plant and use it as a drainage saucer. Those flimsy plastic ones you can buy at Home Depot and Lowe's, I guarantee those will break on you if you put a heavy plant on there. I have learned that the hard way. At my last place, I had a calathea that looked very, very nice. And it looked great, and I was so happy with it until I picked it up to move, and I saw that the drainage saucer had been broken for the past few months, and it damaged the hardwood floor. And thankfully, my sister paid the security deposit. I didn't, but it cost a little bit. So always avoid that if you can. And, I should have known better. I should have just used a plate. And then old t-shirts and rags. Instead of throwing them out, you can use it to clean your leaves, or just as towels. You will inevitably dribble some water when you have houseplants. It's 100% going to happen. You don't need to use paper towels to clean it up. Just use the stuff that you already have. And that kind of concludes the formal portion of the presentation. I think we still got a few minutes for Q&A if you guys want to hop into that.
I think we answered all of the questions that have come in so far. I'll give people a moment to throw any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A if you want to. While we wait, Kenny, I have a question for you. When I have tried coffee grounds before, they have gotten moldy. So does that mean I put too many in there, or should I kind of bury them in the dirt a little bit? What did I do wrong?
Possibly too many, and you can also just add a little bit and kind of mix it into the soil, and that should do well. But also, mold is not always a bad sign with houseplants. I've had a lot of healthy ones that actually have just kind of a consistent layer growing on the top or out of one of the drainage holes on the bottom. And I have never personally actually found that to be a massive issue. You can always just scrape it off, and it kind of does fine. And I just remembered, we actually have an exit poll for you guys, so I'm going to share that with you while we answer some of your questions.
We have a question in the Q&A. Do you have suggestions for how to deal with fungus gnats?
Yes, those are the absolute worst. If you get them, they are super hard to get rid of, and they're just so dumb. They'll fly in your coffee. If you have any open container of liquid, they're just going to fly in it. I've probably done at least 10 fungus gnats in my day. The protein is not significant. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. But the best way you can get rid of them is by making sure you don't have any sitting water out. So like if you water something and the drainage tray fills up, they like that sitting water. So make sure to dump that out, and maybe you can use it to water another plant. They also feed on decaying plant matter. So if you have a bunch of dead leaves on your plant, make sure to take those off because it can do well. And one of the best things you can do is also just put a layer of sand on the top of your soil. They lay their eggs right beneath the surface, and then they have to crawl up through the soil once they hatch. And on a microscopic level, sand is essentially razor sharp, and it just shreds them to tears. It's not like the most effective way, but if you continually do it, it does work. You can also mix water with hydrogen peroxide and water that and put that into your soil. I've done that. You don't need to use that much hydrogen peroxide, but that also works well. It just takes a couple of different treatments.
We have had a few more questions come in. Amanda says, I have a jade plant I want to grow and make it more full. I heard that you can poke a hole in the bark and a branch will form. Do you have any advice for this?
Yeah, a lot of plants they can grow like that. Fiddly figs the same way. It's called notching. But if you essentially just, cut a little spot in there, it can regrow like that. You can also propagate jades very, very easily from leaf cuttings. So if you just hack off one of those leaves and stick it in soil, you can cover it with something to keep it humid. That's also a great way to propagate those.
Another question is, which type of plants can you grow hydroponically?
Pretty much everything. I've actually never seen cactus or succulents, but I'm pretty sure you can do it. But essentially every single tropical plant can be grown hydroponically. Like I said, I do monsteras, you can do pothos. Pretty much any tropical plant I've seen can kind of grow indefinitely. And there are also really, really cool hydroponic systems out there that grow herbs. I have a lettuce grow, if you've heard of those, or arrow gardens. They are pretty expensive, but you can kind of convert them into your own houseplant type stuff. You just got to get little plugs for them. And you can create your own hydroponic systems out of just a regular plastic bin, and that will be in the resources that we send you after this webinar.
We have another question. When leaves start to yellow on the end, is that an indication of too much watering?
It is very hard to say because yellow leaves can come from overwatering, they can come from underwatering, they can come from pests, and they can come from too much sunlight. So it's really hard to say without knowing exactly your environmental conditions. But in general, if you see leaves yellowing, it's typically a watering issue. So I would go through, check those roots. If they look mushy and brown and your plant's kind of limp in addition to those yellows, you most likely have root rot. And you can fix that by chopping off those roots and replanting it into a more appropriate medium. But if you see those plants are healthy and it's still turning yellow, it is most likely an underwatering issue. So you could actually up it a little bit. Or it's potentially getting a little too much sunlight. If you see it crisping up and turning brown in addition to yellow, that is most likely a sign of either too much sun or not enough humidity.
I think we have time for just one last quick question. I think this is a great one to end on. Meg wants to know, if you could start your plant collection over, what is the #1 piece of advice you wish you could have followed from the beginning?
That's a really good question. I've actually never really thought about that before, but I think it would definitely be just growing my collection too big, too fast. I was definitely someone who fell into that mode of seeing plants as commodities and things to be collected rather than living things. And I ended up just killing a lot of plants as a result. And at the time, like I said, I was kind of happy because it just gave me a new place to put a plant. But looking back at it, it was just a really terrible system. I was throwing away tons of money by letting these plants die, and hurting the environment as a result. So I do really wish that I had been more targeted in my curation, because I feel like I would love all of the plants that I have instead of having some that I love and some that I just happened to buy because I was bored on a Saturday and wanted to go plant shopping. Because there are now a lot of plants that I have that, I still want to take care of them. They're still living things. I still really, really value them. But I like a lot of my houseplants a lot more than the other ones. And sometimes when I'm taking care of those ones that I'm not quite as passionate about, I'm really sitting there ugh, it feels like a chore more than it really should. This should be a fun hobby, one that's bringing me joy, one that's bringing you joy. So I would really just make sure that the plants that you get, you're absolutely in love with, and making sure that you have the right conditions at home to take care of it. Like I said, I kept buying maidenhair ferns like an absolute fool, and eventually I realized this just isn't the plant for me. So pay attention to your past mistakes, be conscious about what you're bringing into your home, and build that indoor jungle slowly, because you're going to learn how to take care of each plant individually before you have an overwhelming amount where you just feel like it's almost a lost cause.
Thanks, Kenny. I think those are all the questions.
Awesome. Well, before we let you guys go, we want to share a couple of upcoming in-person events that Sustainability Matters has. On September 30th, we will be having lunch at the Rappahannock County landfill. On October 7th, Hannah will be tabling with some of her Mountain Vista Governor School students at the Tree Fest in Winchester at Jim Barnett Park, where we will actually be installing a native pollinator meadow next year. So if you want to see that site, get out there. It'll be a super fun event. I believe there's also a Halloween event that's happening in the park that same day. So you could kind of go for a 2-for-1. Would highly recommend checking that park out. On October 22nd, we have a seed gathering event in Shenandoah. That and the landfill are for members and volunteers only. So if you would like more information, please join us as a member, and feel free to reach out to us on Instagram if you have questions about that. And we'll be sure to get back to you to give you all the details for those events. And then on October 29th, there is an art show at Muse Vineyard in Woodstock, Virginia. They will be donating a proceed of that art show to Sustainability Matters. And those art pieces will be up for sale, I believe, beginning October 1st, up for the entire month. So if you want to go check them out beforehand, please do. If you find something you like, please buy it, because that helps Sustainability Matters and could make your house even more beautiful. But I think that kind of concludes the webinar for today. So thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your Tuesday afternoon to spend with Sustainability Matters and hearing me yap at you guys some more. I really hope you found this webinar useful. And if you did, please be sure to share Sustainability Matters with your friends and your community members. We are really trying to grow our online presence and just kind of spread out just from the Shenandoah Valley. So if you know people from around the way, please share Sustainability Matters with them. And thank you guys for your continued support. Like I mentioned, we'll be sending out a follow-up email after this webinar that will have all of the resources I mentioned in there, as well as a recording of the webinar, which will be on YouTube in a couple weeks, Facebook, I believe, immediately, and through Eventbrite, you should have access to it for a couple of days as well in that follow-up email. And as I said, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us either at our email address, through the contact form on our website, or just through messaging us on Instagram. Or on Facebook if you use it. I will do my best to monitor that as best I can, especially after this. Well, thank you guys. We are going to head and end the webinar. But I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday evening, and I hope to see you guys at more future Sustainability Matters events. Thank you all.